Now, we all know that gravity is a constant factor in our everyday lives. It's also a constant factor in research, so much that it can be easy to forget about. However, in areas ranging from physics and chemistry to biological engineering, the ability to conduct research where gravity is essentially removed from the equation opens up exciting new possibilities. Now, on Earth, simulating microgravity conditions for even a very short time is extremely difficult. However, on the International Space Station, microgravity is part of everyday life. That's why NSF partners with CASIS to give researchers the ability to send projects to this unique environment that have focused on areas including fluid dynamics, tissue engineering, mechanobiology, and transport phenomenon. We're looking forward to the upcoming launch and the benefits we'll see here on Earth from this science that's done in space. We have an exciting panel lined up today to discuss how this research is designed and how it's conducted on the International Space Station. CNN's Ashley Strickland will be moderating the panel, and we're very happy she could join us today. The researchers we have are Peter Sunderland, Professor of Fire Protection Studies at the University of Maryland, Yangying Zhu, Professor of Mechanical Engineering at UC Santa Barbara, Paolo Luzzatto-Fegiz, also Professor of Mechanical Engineering at UC Santa Barbara, and Ngan Huang, Professor of Cardiothoracic Surgery at Stanford Cardiovascular Institute. In addition, we're excited to have astronauts Drew Morgan and Jessica Meir from NASA both joining us. They have served as flight engineers on the ISS for multiple expeditions, and they'll be able to tell us how the astronauts contribute to these experiments. And with that brief introduction, I'll turn this over to you, Ashley. Thank you and enjoy.
Great, thank you so much, Dawn. I appreciate it. Well, welcome to all of our fantastic panelists today. I just wanted to say thank you for being here. I'm really excited to talk to you about your investigations. As we all know, there has been such an incredible array of scientific investigations on the space station for years. So I'd really love to hear from each of our investigators here today about the projects they're working on. Peter, let's start with you. Let's hear about your project.
My project is to look at cool diffusion flames in microgravity, and these flames don't exist on Earth. We can't observe them on Earth. So all flames have cool temperature chemistry that's going on, but all the experiments we've done so far have been on Earth with hot temperature flames. So there's whole regimes of the chemistry and the flame behavior that really isn't understood. And hopefully by performing these tests on the space station, we'll learn more about that.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And Nan, tell us about your project. Oh, Nan, I think you're muted. If you can unmute.
I thought I was unmuted already.
There you go, you're fine.
Our project is really focused on sarcopenia, which is an age-related deterioration of skeletal muscle function. And because sarcopenia can lead to frailty and poor health outcomes, there's really a need to try to look for new drugs to combat this progressive deterioration, but it's hard to do on Earth because sarcopenia takes decades to progress. And so we were interested in looking at microgravity as a way to potentially speed up the process of this process of age-related deterioration. And so we are hoping to study engineered skeletal muscle in microgravity to see if it is a potentially alternative model to study sarcopenia, such that we can do drug screening in a much faster capacity.
Thank you. And Yangying, can you tell us about your investigation?
Of course, yeah. So my name is Yangying, and we work on heat transfer, particularly on boiling and condensation. These processes are very important processes in wide engineering applications, ranging from water desalination to power generation, also heating and cooling of our cars and our buildings, and cooling of electronics. And the real challenge of boiling and condensation is that their heat transfer performance is really dominated by the movement of bubbles and droplets. And so on Earth, these forces are dominant by gravity and buoyancy. So whenever we are trying to control the bubbles and droplet, it's really coupled with gravity. So it's hard for us to really understand and come up with a model to understand the system. So in microgravity, there is no gravity or buoyancy. So it's an ideal environment for us to explore other methods to manipulate droplets and bubbles. And so our goal is to really come up with ways And in particular, we are using light to control droplets and bubbles in the microgravity. And our goal is to being able to manipulate them and understand them quantitatively, and ultimately enhance boiling and heat, boiling and condensation for both on Earth applications as well as in the space applications. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And Paolo, can you tell us about your project?
Yes, so in our project, we took sediment, which is a mixture of typically clay, silt, and sand, and we sent it to the ISS. And the reason is that we wanted to understand what are called cohesive forces, and these are what can make sediment sticky. So for example, if you take mud, it's this sort of very sticky substance. And these cohesive forces, they're very important for all sorts of reasons. For example, they can affect the health of ecosystems. They can affect, when and whether a mudslide will start. And they're also very important to determine how much carbon the ocean can ultimately take from the atmosphere and sequester. Now, the problem is that these cohesive forces are very weak compared to gravity. And so it's hard to do an experiment on Earth where you can measure these accurately. And so by turning off gravity on the ISS, we're able to do these experiments where we looked at just cohesive forces in isolation. And then we're now developing models based on that we can use for benefit to life and activities on Earth.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you. All of your projects just sound so fascinating, and I think it really does highlight the diversity of science that can occur on the space station. Now, obviously, if it's occurring on the space station, that means your investigation is going to be in this really unique microgravity environment. And I know that each of you kind of touched on this while you're describing your projects, but I'd like to know why removing gravity from the equation really helps you to pursue your research questions and find those answers you're looking for. Peter, would you like to start?
Sure, gravity is ubiquitous in combustion because hot gases rise. So a candle flame is very narrow and tall. And in microgravity, if you burn that same candle, you'll find it's much larger. It's a spherical flame. And that opens things up for doing measurements that we can't do on Earth because you have a lot more space to work with. Your gradients aren't so close. You have just more room to work with for your diagnostics. And in my case, for these low temperature flames, that allows flames to exist at temperatures that those flames can't exist in normal gravity. So it's a whole new class of flames that we haven't been able to absorb before.
Oh, wow. And Yangying, can you expand a little bit more on how your project benefits from being in this environment?
Definitely. So very similar to Peter, and in terms of boiling and condensation, exactly in the microgravity, we are able to observe bubbles that are 10 times bigger than they will appear on Earth. Also droplet. So it really allows us to explore these systems with length scales that are much beyond what we can observe on Earth. So that is beyond what we said, removing gravity. So allowing us to come up with equations and to observe systems that are include much more length scales.
Oh, wow. And Ngan, can you expand some more on your project being in this environment as well?
Sure. Now, most of what we understand about muscle and muscle-related diseases are under conditions of normal gravity. And so in the condition of microgravity, that is a very sort of a unique stressor in terms of how it affects living cells and living tissues. And so from what is previously known, it seems that microgravity can potentially accelerate the process of aging and muscle disuse. And so that could also potentially accelerate the process of sarcopenia in our tissue engineered muscle. And so, I think by removing gravity, it could be feasible to do things like drug screening on a dish as a way to identify different targets for treating sarcopenia.
Thank you. And Paolo, can you talk about the benefit of microgravity for your project as well?
Sure. So, for us, we want to look at these forces that can make sediment clump together and make aggregates. And so, a simple experiment, ideally, we'd like to be able to run is just, putting some sediment in a little vial and shaking it, with some water, and then, the sediment breaks up, and then over time, you should be able to look at it, how it clumps up again and makes aggregates again. The problem is that sediment is also relatively heavy, and so it sinks relatively quickly. And that's not a problem in the ocean where, it can sink for, hundreds of feet to the bottom of the ocean, so there's plenty of time to make aggregates. But in the lab, we have only so much depth to a tank that we can have. And so in our lab, we can run experiments for something like 10 minutes. But on the ISS, we've been able to run experiments for over 3 months, a single continuous experiment. And so that's really a game changer in terms of what you can then understand and discover in these systems.
Wow, I think each of you really highlights how important it is to make sure that these experiments are going up to the space station. And that being said, something I've always been fascinated by, and I'd love for each of you to share your experiences with this, is how, from your lab environment to getting your investigation on the space station, obviously a lot of things have to happen, including scaling it down because it needs to be much smaller, preparing it to survive and endure a launch into space. And I'm sure that must take a lot of time. Paolo, I'd actually like to go back to you to start to hear about what your experience was like scaling down your investigation and preparing it to launch to space.
Sure. So this was the first experiment for my group on the ISS. And so, I know it's difficult even to get an experiment working in my own lab sometime. And so I wanted something, as simple and reliable as possible to make sure we could get some useful data. And so we designed an experiment that reused as much as possible in terms of other proven apparatus that was already on the ISS. Something I was surprised to learn was just how much storage and equipment there is on the ISS at any one time. And so the approach we took was to keep the experiment very simple and reliable, and then to keep the sort of more complicated steps in the math we use to analyze the data. And so I've been working, on this project. My co-investigator is, his name is Eckhard Mayberg. He's also a professor at UC Santa Barbara. And he runs numerical simulations, computer simulations of what the sediment can do. And then by comparing the simulations and the data from the ISS, we can develop models that we can use. Then there is the step you were saying of, okay, how do we get it so that it can safely be launched and so on. And then there are companies that specialize in, turning your lab version of the experiment into something that can go to space. And they're called implementation partners. And we work with a company called Zinc Technologies, who have been great engineering partners. And they also develop procedures that the astronauts can then follow.
Oh,
and for us, it took something roughly about 2 years from when we started in our lab to getting the experiment launched.
Wow. And Peter, I'm curious, what has this experience been like for you preparing your investigation to go up?
Well, I gotta say, sometimes with lab tours, I'm embarrassed because my students put everything together with plywood and drywall screws. And it's not like that at all in space. And luckily what we can do is make the prototype that way and do a quick job and take pictures and send it to NASA. This is NASA Gleaned Research Center in Cleveland, Ohio. And they put everything together in the most beautiful, pristine ways. So they really do that scaling down. And we interact with them a lot, also as in technologies, as Paolo mentioned, to make a beautiful design that's robust and reliable in space.
That's great. And Yangying, tell us about your experience with that too.
Yeah, so we are going to go through this whole experience. So exactly like what Paolo and Peter has described, we are going to build everything in our own lab, and we are working with an implementation partner that will integrate our experimental setup into their facility and also get it certified. And so we are, again, I think that for successful space experiment, it will just require testing repeatedly so that everything works and with 100% success rate.
Exactly. And Nan, what about your experience?
Great. Well, transitioning from a petri dish to bioreactors that are bound for the ISS has been really quite a journey. We've been working with an experienced implementation partner for the past 9 months to engineer a custom bioreactor that can basically carry out our experiment of engineered tissues on the ISS. And we've had to consider a number of new factors that we normally wouldn't think about in our regular lab environment. including, developing, bioreactors that are amenable to control, levels of certain gases like carbon dioxide or oxygen that our engineered tissues need to survive, in space, and having it really well controlled. Or, just designing experiments where there's wiggle room to account for, potential delays in the launch, and then the logistics of a bioreactor that's strong enough that can keep the engineered tissues safe. So, the tissues are immobilized so that they're not just like floating around during the launch. And these are things that we haven't needed to think about, previously. And so the process, has been a long one, and we have probably another, 6 to 9 months of further optimizations. And so it's been, it's really eye-opening, and it's been really exciting.
That sounds really exciting. And I think it's interesting, each of you has kind of a similar experience in some ways, but also because of the individual science that you're working on, it's going to differ in other ways. Something else that I would love to know about is how you prepare to essentially hand off your investigation while it's on the space station, and it may be worked on by someone who is not an expert in the field that you are an expert in. And so you're preparing it to be handed off to and maintained by our wonderful astronauts. And so I'd like to know what kind of that experience is like. Peter, why don't you start?
Well, I got to say, all the crew that I've ever worked with have been fantastic, and they're so careful, and they cannot be replaced by robots. People say, why do we have a manned space program? We can replace them with robots, and that's not true at all. We really need that trained crew to troubleshoot. And this week on a different experiment, I had a problem where a fuel bottle wouldn't open. The crew member couldn't open the bottle. If that happens in your laboratory at school, you take a wrench, it's a little scary, and you force open the bottle, but they can't do that. If a circuit breaker blows in your house, you probably just flip it back. They also can't do that. So it's a very different environment. Safety is really important. And that's one reason we like studying combustion and fire, to try to make that a safer fire environment for them as well.
Definitely. And Yangying, can you talk about what that experience is like, preparing it to hand it off so it's managed by somebody else in space?
So I would say that we are very much inspired by previous, looking at previous experiment. For example, the design of our experimental setup is very much inspired by the hardware that Paolo mentioned in his previous experiment. And so really thinking about how complicated the process is on Earth in our own lab, and how can we really make sure that a lot of the things, if we can automate the process, you can rely on automation. But I would really say that I think troubleshooting is really the key. We cannot, we really have to rely on astronaut, and if I think that's require a lot of ground communication. So we would ideally would like to monitor the experiment in real time in a ground control center, and just require a lot of communication. But I think in our design, we would like to make sure that things that we can automate will run automatically.
And Nan, how are you looking at that preparation?
Sure, a little bit similar to what Yangying mentioned. We're also building the bioreactor that has some similarities to previously built bioreactors that have been, deemed safe and certified. And so, by working with our implementation partner to build, a bioreactor that, as well as the necessary operations in a very streamlined process that is similar to how previous bioreactors performed on the ISS, we think that, this way, it should be, fairly feasible for the astronauts to be able to carry on the experiments that we need to do. And of course, we know that the astronauts will be very careful and will have all the necessary training that they will need to conduct in a very safe manner.
Of course. And Paolo, can you talk about what this experience was like for you?
Yes, so we worked with the engineering partner, Zin Technologies, and they prepared these documents that explain how to operate the experiment. And the person in charge of this is the operations lead. And for our experiment, her name was Kathy Frey, again from Zin Technologies. And then she has the job of translating, the sometimes overly specific thing that someone might, like me, might say, and turning that into some, specific action items that the astronauts can implement, in a reasonable time. And but something that's also remarkable, so many of the astronauts are, of course, scientists themselves. And the astronauts for our experiment, they were Serena Onion Chancellor and Alexander Gerst. And Alex Gerst in particular is a geophysicist. And so he was particularly excited about our sediment experiment. And so it was really great working with them.
That's fantastic. And Paolo, I did want to ask you another follow-up question. What kind of benefits did you see from sending your experiment to the space station now that some time has elapsed between that?
Sure. So we were able to measure the quantities we wanted to measure, essentially how these cohesive forces, this stickiness between particles, how they depend on the kind of minerals you have in the sediment and what kind of other substances you have in the water, what kind of salts you have in there, for example. And so that part which we wanted to achieve was successful. Possibly the even more exciting aspect was seeing things we did not expect. We expected our experiment to run for 2 weeks, maybe a month, and then things would stop happening. But we actually saw that interesting physics kept happening for 3 months. And we're still analyzing this data, but we might have stumbled into some interesting new physics about how particles might interact and aggregate in space. And I think, to me, that's very exciting, for this experiment, but also I think it might be a nice example of as entities like cases and so on, they make these great strides in widening access to low Earth orbit and to microgravity, what discoveries might be out there that we don't expect, but we'll start finding as we have more and more access to low Earth orbit.
That's fantastic news. Thank you for sharing that. And I'd actually like to invite our astronauts, Jessica Meir and Drew Morgan, to join the conversation now. Speaking about investigations of science on the space station, I know that both of you participated in quite a few of those while you were up there together. And I'd really like to ask you about one that you participated in together as co-investigators, this Mighty Mice in Space research that just published recently. Can you both tell us just a little bit more about that and what that experience was like for you?
Sure, Ashley, absolutely. First of all, it's so nice being here today and seeing some of the faces behind the incredible work that we do up on the International Space Station. It really means a lot to us to be making that connection, that personal connection for the experiments that we do. The Mighty Mice experiment was actually one of Drew and my favorite investigations to work on. It was really interesting for us because both of us have a life science background. I was a comparative physiologist in my previous career, and Drew was, of course, a medical doctor. Most people in our office have engineering degrees, so we were so excited to be up there, the two of us together, working on this life science investigation, which really related to a lot of our previous work. And this experiment was a really interesting one where it was working with the myostatin pathway. Myostatin is an inhibitor to muscle growth. So it's a normal part that we have in our bodies as humans that helps us keep everything in check. These mice were actually given a therapeutic agent to suppress that pathway. So they were able to grow much bigger muscle and also have improved bone density as well. Those things are very important in the spaceflight microgravity environment. Of course, we have this loss of bone density and muscle mass when we are away from the pull of gravity. We counteract that with exercise. But when we're talking about longer duration missions, if we're going to go all the way to Mars, we need to have an exercise system that can still offset those effects, but we have a much tighter mass constraint. The equipment on the space station that keeps us healthy and brings us back safely, that stuff is really large. So in a longer duration mission, we might need both smaller equipment or maybe even some therapeutic strategies to help us maintain bone density and muscle loss. The other interesting thing are all these parallels toward degenerative states on the Earth. So there are a lot of disease states with patients that have impacts to their bone and muscle systems, and this type of target therapy might be applied to that as well. And that's one of the things that's really a commonality between all the research we do. It applies not only toward future space exploration, but also benefits life back on Earth. So in this particular study, these mice that had this therapeutic agent, they were able to maintain that bone density and muscle mass throughout the mission compared to the controls. So a very exciting finding. And I think the other thing that made it so cool for Drew and I to see, being the ones on board, carrying out that experiment, and then coming back to Earth, serving as co-authors. And now this study has already been published in a very prestigious journal. So nice to see that this could be the whole scientific process. I know from being a scientist in my previous career as well, can be quite a lengthy process. So it's really exciting and encouraging to see this move along so quickly.
That's fantastic. Drew, is there anything that you'd like to add about working on the experiment?
Yeah, absolutely, Ashley. Jessica really covered that very comprehensively, but I just wanted to reiterate the reward that came with doing a study like this, where we were able to see it arrive on a SpaceX Crew Dragon vehicle, conduct the payload over the course of a month, and then return the payload, in this case, the mice back to Earth, and then to see that come full circle, see that the data analyzed, and then see it published, and then even be invited to participate as co-authors on the publication. Very rewarding. And this all has happened now, a lot of the background research, of course, the preparation years in the making, but the actual execution of launching the payload on a rocket, spending time on the ISS, returning to Earth, crunching the numbers, publishing the data, all within about a year's time is pretty amazing. And it just speaks a lot to not just the science conducted, but the commercial partnerships that enable us to do this science.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I know that both of you were also involved in a combustion experiment as well, which actually sounds kind of similar to Peter. And so I'm curious, what is it like for you to also work on these physical science investigations too?
Sure. We did participate in a study called confined combustion, and it's combustion and is one of the many types of physical science that we conduct on board. And what's neat about that is it is very visual. It's something that's very easy for us to communicate to the public about how a flame looks differently. And we talked a little bit about that how in the absence of convection, in the absence of gravity, we see flame looks different. And that is something very visual and something very easy for the public to see and understand that phenomenon that we just take for granted on Earth are different in space on board the ISS. A lot of fun to conduct this one because, of course, we're very, very concerned about fire safety, of course, in space and space in general. And we were actually able within the payload itself, able to conduct small burns and actually watch them. That was a study that we were able to actually see ourselves, watch different materials burn inside this combustion chamber. Very, very cool to watch.
That sounds really cool. Yeah, I've really enjoyed following those experiments too. The images are always fantastic that come back from them. Jessica, was there anything you'd like to add about that investigation?
I think Drew captured the high points. It was really enjoyable to be a part of that experiment, to be watching it and have that visual feedback. And I think, as all the investigators captured earlier, as a scientist, it's just such an incredibly exciting environment when you don't have that elephant in the room, that element of gravity that is always present in everything that we do on Earth. So once you remove that elephant in the room and you remove and eliminate those gravity-dependent processes, you never know the unanticipated outcomes that might come out from those results. And so it's an incredibly exciting environment to do all of these investigations in.
Oh, absolutely. And something that both of you touched on that I'd like to follow up on too is the fact that, you are working on these investigations, but it seems rare that they come full circle as quickly as this Mighty Mice paper did, for instance. Like you said, Drew, that was a year. So do you, as astronauts and other astronauts, have the chance to really see things come full circle and see what those benefits could be for life in space or those of us here on Earth?
Well, I think that this was a pretty unique example of how quickly that process happened, and we feel so fortunate to have been a part of that. But we have a great communication and science communication office here. So anytime we want to delve into what some of the past investigations have revealed and stay part of the process, we can. So it's great to try to follow along with that. I know when I talk to people and give examples of some of the things that we're doing, there are protein crystal growth experiments, for example. You can grow larger and more pure crystals without gravity. And so that allows you to learn more about that 3D structure of the protein and to potentially develop inhibitors to sites that might cause disease states related to those proteins on the Earth. So again, this is another category that has applications toward future spaceflight, but has so many applications to benefit life on Earth and patients with existing disease states on Earth. And an example of that, there was a Japanese study conducted relatively recently on the space station that led to a new drug that's now in clinical trials for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. So we're actually seeing those tangible results from the work that we do on the International Space Station, and that makes it so much more rewarding.
Definitely. And Drew, have there been any investigations, given your background as a doctor, are there investigations and experiments that are of interest to you to follow the process of?
Yeah, absolutely. I alluded to the variety of science that's conducted on board the ISS. There's, of course, chemistry, physical science, earth and space science, biological science, and then, of course, there's human research. And that, of course, being a medical doctor has always been very interesting to me. And many of those studies, we actually participate as a subject ourselves. And I participated in a study called Fluid Shifts, which is an example of a very long study that has lasted a number of years. And I was the final subject of, and Jessica was the operator for while I was the subject. And that study is aimed at understanding how fluid physiology and blood flow change as a result of living in microgravity for a long period of time, and understanding its relationship with intracranial pressure and pressure in the brain, and if that has any impact on our vision, because we do know that we are seeing some changes long-term in some astronauts' vision, and this will help us understand that a little bit better. But that's a great example of a study that's went on for a number of years, and we're just now getting to the point where we're going to understand what some of that data is showing us.
Right, yeah, it seems like there really is a great opportunity to have these long studies that can go for quite a while, but also you have the short turnaround ones too. So again, really hints at that variety. And also, I'd like to open this to all of our panelists to please feel free to contribute to this, but something we've been talking about quite a bit on this panel I'd like to explore a little bit more of is just at its heart why it is so important for us to conduct these scientific investigations on this unique orbiting laboratory and see what we can get out of that. And anyone is welcome to jump in, please.
I would say just from the most basic aspect, doing basic science in general, we know we have countless examples of sometimes the most interesting and novel finding is something that was completely unanticipated. We'll have these unanticipated outcomes that lead to incredible discoveries all over in all of the different scientific fields. So basic science is always important to pursue. And as we mentioned, I think several times already, the microgravity, the space environment is so unique. Not even just the microgravity, the radiation, the thermal environment, so many different aspects are able to expose many different pathways in all of these systems. Who knows what we will find, but if we need to keep doing this science and pursue to find not only these hypothesis-driven studies and get those results, but then those unanticipated outcomes as well.
Definitely. And would any of our scientific investigators like to jump in on that?
Maybe I'll say very short sentences. So I think that one thing that's unique to boiling and condensation is that the heat transfer is severely worse than the boiling and condensation on Earth, because like I said, the successful heat transfer rely on the movement of bubbles and droplets. And so on Earth, by having gravity and buoyancy, it's actually helping the heat transfer. So in the space, you will actually find that we can't even run boiling continuously because bubbles will just be stagnant and they will accumulate on the heat transfer surface. So I think that's, again, a very great opportunity for us to, if we can do boiling successfully in the space, that can open great opportunities for moving those wide engineering applications into the space.
Thank you. And Drew, were you going to say something?
No, please continue. That was a great answer.
No,
So
yeah, go ahead,
I'd like
Peter.
to say that in the field of combustion in the last 10 years of microgravity, the discoveries have been tremendous. And you can't predict them, you can't anticipate them, but there have been 3 or 4 that just shook the foundations of everything we thought we understood about combustion. And I hope that we'll see more of those.
Yeah, would you actually like to elaborate on a couple of those? Because I know that's been going on for a while.
Well, certainly there's the softballs. These are flames that are spherical flames that just drift around in space. They're about 3 millimeters in diameter, and people didn't think those could exist. And we've seen it also with the cool diffusion flames with droplets. There was a complete surprise. The droplet kept shrinking, and you couldn't see the flame anymore. The cameras didn't detect it, but the droplet was shrinking. And so for the investigators to figure out that that was the cool diffusion flame was really quite a tremendous advance.
And Ngan, I know that there's been a lot of interest, especially around this area that you were talking about. To you, why is it so important to pursue this?
Sure. Well, I think in the general field of just tissue engineering, I think microgravity versus gravity makes quite a big difference. On Earth, in gravity, our tissue engineering is really limited by the diffusion of oxygen. And so that really limits how big or how scalable our engineered tissues can be on Earth unless we build in some ways to push in the perfusion of nutrients into those engineered tissues. But in microgravity, those assumptions go away. And so the engineered tissues are more capable of being able to survive even in much larger scales. And so we think that microgravity has a lot of potential for tissue engineering benefits, such that we can create more complex and more scalable tissues in microgravity compared to on Earth.
Definitely. And Paolo, would you like to talk about how this kind of research, in this environment can impact your field?
Sure. So, this very exciting aspect for us is that once you turn off gravity, you can have that forces and effects that normally are very, very weak and they're kind of obscured, they actually become really prominent and they can become, the primary drivers of the physics you're seeing. And so we often don't expect them just because we don't have a framework for thinking about them because we're not used to seeing them in everyday life. And as we discover more and more of these phenomena, then we'll come up with more and more applications for them. For example, some of these might be useful to understanding fundamentals of how maybe planets form and how the solar system formed. Others might give us new routes for making new kinds of materials that we can make in Earth orbit that then we can use back on Earth and with a much greater performance than materials we're used to making on Earth. And so it's very, very exciting to see as the number of experiments on the ISS expand what we might discover.
And Drew, would you like to add anything about how you've seen, medical research that's been happening on the space station or other areas that you're interested in?
Yeah, absolutely. Very closely related to the field of tissue engineering. The biofabrication facility flew up while I was on board. Jessica and I and our crewmate Christina all interacted with it. And basically it's a tissue bioprinter that can 3D print tissues in a way that we can't without normally a tissue requires scaffolding on Earth. Without scaffolding, we're able to grow tissues that are novel in microgravity that would be difficult to produce. A good example of those would be cylinder shaped like vessels. And we've saw some early promise in the tissue printing in microgravity with the biofabrication facility.
And I was curious, looking ahead to this launch that's going to be happening next week, there's some other very interesting cargo that's going to be coming up. And I would like to ask our astronauts to kind of weigh in on what they think about those. I know one of those is the 360-degree EVA camera. And obviously, most of us have not had experience doing an EVA or a spacewalk. And so I'd love, first of all, for you to tell us just what that's like, and also how this camera could be used, because it'll have to be tested outside of the space station, so that will require a spacewalk as well.
Yeah, we are very excited about this new 360-degree camera, and it actually is something that both Drew and I had experience with during our mission in a slightly different aspect. There is a camera up there right now called the ISS Experience by the same developers, Felix and Paul Studios, and this camera has really revolutionized how we are able to share what we do with all of you and all the world. It is this 3D, completely immersive experience that you will be able to use in virtual reality. We filmed a lot of aspects of our mission on board the International Space Station with that camera, and I've seen a preview down here on the ground in that virtual reality, and I can tell you it is astounding. It's so touching. We feel like we are right back up there. It feels so real. So to me, it's giving us this tool to share what we experience with everyone in a completely novel and different way. And I'm so excited about it. There have been some other products that they did release, one already called Space Explorers about astronaut training, the ISS Experience being filmed now, and now this new EVA camera that will be launching will enable that 3D immersive experience during a spacewalk. And we can be the first to tell you that is the highlight of the mission. Spacewalks are the most challenging thing that we do mentally and physically, and the most exciting. When you're out there in your own little spacecraft, looking down at the Earth with nothing between the void and blackness of space except for this thin visor of your helmet, it is an awe-inspiring experience for sure. And I'm sure both Drew and I got the chance to do several spacewalks during our mission. We were so fortunate. I'm sure Drew will have some more things to say about it as well.
Yes, to be able to take this 360-degree camera outside the ISS after seeing the power of it inside the ISS and the way it creates that immersive experience to make you feel like you're really there, to be able to take that outside, that is especially unique. The camera itself will be mounted on an appendage of the Canada arm, and it'll be able to be positioned in a variety of places outside the ISS. And so it will give us great views, 360-degree views of the ISS, the hardware itself, the Earth, and astronauts doing spacewalks. The power of that is just incredible. And I think it has applications beyond just also communicating to everyone on Earth what that experience is like. But I see real potential there for opportunities to train astronauts as we prepare for spacewalks to be able to go out and look in a 360-degree immersive way at an area that maybe we'd go potentially work on a real spacewalk.
That sounds fantastic. I have to say, watching your spacewalks is one of the highlights. And so to be able to experience in that way, I can't wait to see that. And something else I feel like we have to mention, space toilets, the universal waste management system that's going up on this as well. It's a new design. And so obviously we know how toilets work here on Earth. Why is it important to figure out how these designs work in space? Obviously something is different. So whoever would like to take that, please feel free.
Oh, almost certainly Jessica and I both will have to talk on this, because you don't realize how much you take a toilet for granted on Earth, that we have them readily available until you're limited to only 2 on the ISS, and one of them breaks. That will get your attention. And so having a functioning toilet on the ISS is extremely important. The existing one is that's up there is very reliable, and it's very unique in that it integrates Russian hardware that has decades of experience behind it, integrated with American hardware that processes the urine and turns it back to drinking water. This new universal waste management system, the UWMS, which we'll just call toilet for short, will be installed. And one of the big drivers of that is that we are going to start to have more and more astronauts living at one time on the ISS. And so we need some more redundancy, we need some more toilets, but this also demonstrates a lot of new technologies, and including 3D printed titanium parts in the UWMS. It also takes a lot of the input that astronauts have given over the years and incorporates them to make it even more user-friendly to maintain. And that's a really important thing for an astronaut. while we were on board the ISS, Jessica and I both did a lot of maintenance on the existing toilet, and that is time consuming and it can be difficult to access. This took a lot of that feedback in mind and made it accessible and very user friendly. And we both have had orientations on it, and I can tell you it has a lot of really neat, simplistic design aspects to it to make it resistant to failure or easy to replace when it does.
Thank you. And Jessica, it looks like we actually have a question about this, and this is from Brendan Byrne. So I wanted to share it with you. Brendan says, I understand there are some upgrades to better accommodate females. Do you have any thoughts on the efforts to make space exploration more inclusive and accessible to female astronauts?
Yeah, absolutely. That is something that NASA is taking very seriously in everything that we do. So the toilet's a great example. This new toilet is incorporating all of the feedback from various crew members. When the existing toilet was made and designed, it was quite a while ago. So I think there were fewer female, if any, back then when it was designed. Sometimes some of the anatomical differences may or may not have been taken into account. So this new toilet better accounts for those anatomical differences, making it much easier to use for everybody up there. This kind of thing also has an application to spacesuits. The new spacesuits that we're developing at NASA are being designed to fit a wide variety, 5th to 95th percentile Americans. So it will encompass the smaller frames and the larger frames. And they've taken a very smart engineering approach in building the smaller prototype first because they've realized that it's easier to scale up. So those new spacesuits are going to fit the smallest crew members and the largest crew members equally well. They'll have a lot more mobility in them, taking into all those anthropometric differences and anatomical differences. So this is something that's always in the forefront of the way that we're doing things. I think sometimes you just have to realize it takes time for a piece of hardware to develop and mature and then be rated for space flight to make it all the way up there. So sometimes it may seem like we're lagging a little bit behind, but we are already, all of those things are already underway in making everything that we do at NASA more effective and easier to use for everybody involved.
That's great news. And it looks like we do have some more questions coming in from media that's watching our panel. So I'd like to share some of those. And Nan, this question is for you from Paul. He says, we often see images from NASA astronauts exercising on the space station or stationary bikes, for example. We're told the effects of microgravity impact astronauts adversely. Besides the value of exercise, what have you learned from your experiments that can apply to aging bodies and sarcopenia?
Sure. So I think particularly for sarcopenia as an age-related muscle disuse system, I think that, we're still kind of really new on this. I think Jessica may be able to also jump into the conversation as well. But I think in terms of, what we know for now has been mostly related to exercise and the need for exercise to maintain muscle regeneration. But even when one does exercise, people as we age will still have some degree of sarcopenia. So we think that, while what we know about what happens with exercise is beneficial and helpful for our system, it doesn't necessarily replicate what actually happens during age-related muscle disuse. And so this is a very new area, and so most of our experiments are still being planned at the in vitro level right now in dishes, but we're hoping that after our launch, we'll be able to do very complex genomics and proteomic screens that will hopefully allow us to then compare those data to what we know from including patients who are healthy and young, who have sort of normal muscle, as well as those that are derived from astronauts as well. So we'll be able to compare and contrast how our system is different from what happens to what happens to astronauts in space.
And we're getting some more questions. So from Mick, he's asking, how is international cooperation on sharing scientific knowledge gleaned in space? Who would like to take that one?
I'll chime in on that one because that's I think one of the most important legacies of the ISS will be scientific cooperation. And I alluded to a study that Jessica and I performed together, fluid shifts, and it was interesting to me for a variety of reasons, but it was one of the few studies that we participated that allowed us to work in both the Russian segment and the US segment, and used hardware provided by the Russian Space Agency, and incorporate all that together and actually work with our cosmonaut crewmates while we were working on it. And that's just one example of many of how the ISS is an example of a very complex problem. The idea of building something in space over the course of several decades and then living and working there continuously now for 20 years together as an example of international cooperation, as a tremendous example of how we can solve tough problems when we all work together.
Definitely.
There are some other great examples of that, and many of the experiments that we do have international teams. There was one that I was a subject for called Vascular Echo, and that was a perfect example. There were investigators in Canada, in the US, and France, all over the world, working together remotely, and they were actually working together remotely to guide me with an ultrasound as I was imaging myself on board the space station. A great example of telemedicine. They were seeing the images real time, giving me feedback, and helping me obtain the useful images for their study. So another great example on what we can do when we all work together.
That's fantastic. Would any of our investigators like to weigh in on this international cooperation that happens?
Well, I want to say I think the scientific method involves publishing in journals that are available to everyone worldwide. So anything we publish does get read by foreigners. I've been encouraged by NASA to develop collaborations internationally, especially with Russia, because the Russia component is so important on the space station. So I have 2 collaborators in Russia and now 1 in Belgium.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I think it's something that, you know, we just keep coming back to. It's fascinating to me with the space station. You know, we are coming up on this anniversary, this 20th anniversary on November 1st of continuous human presence on the ISS. And again, you know, as everyone has alluded to, this really does highlight how we are better and stronger when we work together. I want to thank all of you so much for weighing in on all of this today. And I would just kind of like to see if we could close with each of you sharing, you know, how it feels to work on investigations that are going to be in this unique environment that truly do have benefits for everyone, both, you know, our future presence in space as well as life here on Earth. And Peter, I'd like to start with you.
Sometimes it's a little hard recruiting students to work for combustion because you read in the news California is phasing out gasoline vehicles. And I explain to them, no, fire's always going to be an issue here. Or then I introduce them to microgravity and they really light up and they want to work on projects, especially related to the space station. I think everyone as a kid wants to be an astronaut at some time. And so the students are very excited, as I am, to work on those projects.
And Yangying, what about you?
I think that I'm super excited about the new opportunity, and I think we don't know yet what will happen in the microgravity. So I think the unknown, trying to really explore what will happen, is what's drawing a lot of the research investigators as well as the students into space experiment.
And Nan, what about you?
Sure. I think as our population ages, sarcopenia becomes an increasingly more important and prevalent problem. And so I think the work that we do in microgravity hopefully will shed light on what's going on and provide potential new therapies. And similar to the other speakers, it's not a problem to recruit postdocs and graduate students to work on this project. Everyone is fighting to work on this project.
That's wonderful news. Paolo, how about you?
You know, to add something maybe very slightly different, you know, it's extremely exciting, of course, to run these experiments on the space station and be able to develop these models we can then use to benefit life on Earth. Something I was surprised by was when we started the experiment, you know, we got the chance to hear the interaction between our operations lead and the astronauts. And we also got a glimpse into all the effort that goes into maintaining and running the International Space Station. And it's really very inspiring and moving to get a sense of the vast scale of this effort and what humanity can do, working together on this project, with this lab in low Earth orbit that's been there for now 20 years. It's really incredible.
Definitely. And Drew, what about you? What has your experience been like?
Well, over the course of this panel, we've talked about a number of the really incredible legacies of the International Space Station program. We've talked about the international cooperation. We've talked about the engineering feats. We've talked about, we have also talked about the development of commercial industry in low Earth orbit. But then, of course, there's going to be the scientific legacy, the science that we conduct that is for the benefit of humanity on Earth, for the benefit of exploration, for the benefit of discovery. And Peter earlier said we can't replace astronauts with robots, and we really appreciate him saying that. But there's nothing that an astronaut wants to do more than be a good steward, good eyes and hands of the fabulous scientific researchers like those represented on the panel today, to be good stewards of that and execute those science experiments on board with precision to advance that scientific knowledge in the name of the ISS program, in the name of discovery, in the name of international cooperation.
And Jessica, what about you?
Yeah, I think Drew captured that perfectly. It is incredibly rewarding as a scientist to be part of that, to know that we are helping, we are contributing to this scientific data set of these really important experiments. For me, it was almost like coming full circle with my recent mission on the space station. I actually previously worked at NASA as a support scientist, coordinating life science experiments. Then I went off to graduate school and I did experiments on animal subjects. And now it's full circle that I am the subject on board. So it's my turn for a little bit of payback. And I feel so fortunate to be able to contribute in that way.
That is fantastic. I have to say, I am just in awe and so inspired by each of you. And I thank you all so much for sharing your fantastic projects and your experiences today. I think this also goes a long way towards inspiring the next generations looking to the future. And as we look at exploring more in low Earth orbit and the Artemis program and really extending our reach in space, I just think this is such a hopeful, inspiring thing. So thank you all. I've really enjoyed speaking with each of you, and it is just fantastic to hear about your experiences.